Good evening, everyone. My name is Inakshi Sopti, and I'm the CEO of the Asia Society India Center. I'm delighted to welcome you all to our program today. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, Asia Society is a leading educational organization dedicated to building awareness about art and culture, business, policy, technology, and education from across Asia on a global stage. At the India Center, our cultural programming is committed to recognizing and foregrounding the diversity of contemporary art, film, literature, and regional artistic traditions from not just India, but across South Asia. We have an exciting lineup of programs planned over the next few months, so do follow our website and social media handles to know more. Today's webinar has been developed in partnership with HarperCollins. We are delighted to welcome Anindita Ghose, previously the editor of Mint Lounge and features director of Vogue India, who is here to discuss her brilliant debut novel, The Illuminated. The Illuminated is a beautiful novel that is hopeful even in the face of tragedy. It's a work of fiction that engages with powerful and topical themes centered on women making their individual journeys in search of identities unapologetically their own, moored in but not hemmed in by the fraught and fractured socio-political milieu. And as one reviewer wrote, sad and funny and wise, The Illuminated is one of those books that will make you hug your loved ones tight. Congratulations on this wonderful debut, Anindita. Anindita will be in conversation with Nilanjana S, novelist, columnist, and editor of several anthologies. Nilanjana writes a regular column on books for the Financial Times, and her third novel, Black River, will be published in 2022. Together, Anindita and Nilanjana will unpack the making of the book, writing as and about women in India today, and how their background as journalists informs their fictional work. Before I invite Nilanjana to take over a bit of housekeeping, we'll end the program with a Q&A session and encourage all of you to post questions in the Q&A box and not the chat box. For our audiences on Facebook, please drop your questions in the comments section. We'll try to get our best to get to each question, but in case we can't, I'd like to thank all of you for tuning in and keep following us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn for updates on upcoming events. And with that, Nilanjana, over to you.
Thank you so much, Inakshi, and everyone at the Asia Society, and all of you readers. And Anindita, what a pleasure it is to have one of the first copies of The Illuminated. This is a book that I've been looking forward to. We love your journalism, and it's so wonderful to see you here as a novelist, as well as everything that you've accomplished as an editor and a writer before. And I love Inakshi's introduction to the book, but I just wanted to tell readers that two of the main characters in the book, Shashi and Tara, are mother and daughter. And when the book opens, it opens with the sadness of the sudden death of Ruby, who is the husband and father of Shashi and Tara, and he's quite a towering figure. In the aftermath of his death, both of the women re-examine their lives, their desires, their freedoms, and their passions. And I was quite intrigued by the way that you drew us in. It isn't a book about a mother-daughter relationship, even though that is central to much of the novel, but each woman has an individuality and a track of her own in many ways. And I feel as part of this growing tradition of women writing women and curious about the inner lives as well of their protagonists. And could you tell us what drew you to Shashi and to Tara as characters?
Firstly, thank you, Asia Society, and thank you, Nilanjana, for introducing the book and being in conversation with me today. Your columns in FT and your books are something that I've always admired, and this is a big honor for me to actually have you discuss the book. So to your question, I think, for me, I've been asked a few times now if I was interested in a mother-daughter story, because there have been a couple of books about mothers and daughters, including Avni Doshi's Girl in White Cotton, in the last couple of years. For me, it was really more a story about women, and they happened to be mother and daughter. It was a good way to show uh, two very divergent perspectives, especially since you mentioned, a primary kind of narrative scheme for the book is how their lives and their identities were defined by this central figure, this man, a very charismatic and successful man, Robi Malek. So, being mother and daughter, their equations with this powerful man are different. It's different generations. It's also a different kind of different level of privilege. So I think it was, I kind of went for a mother and daughter character to kind of just examine the perspectives of two very different women. And the other characters in the book, the other women, their friends, or I don't want to give away too much, but the other women are very important to me as well. So I do see it as a book about a collective of women or a community of women rather than just these two figures.
I think that is one of the most important things for me, that there was a mix of friendship, uh, and also some of these friendships were a little edgy. And then there were again the relationships between the two men. In a way, the Illuminated seems to be constructed as a web of relationships. The two men, Robi, who was Shashi's husband, and Professor Amitabh Dhar, who's a Sanskrit scholar, are both similar in a certain way. They're charismatic, they're used to wielding power, they are both used to also getting what they want. But a lot of the book is also about the journey of women as they start to step out into the world and to ask themselves, what are my own desires? What are my own wants and needs? And I was fascinated by something that you did with Tara particularly. And just to fill this in, Tara is a student in a college in Mysore, and she's also studying Sanskrit. So in a way, she's part of our Viradari, right? She's somebody who is deeply immersed in this world of stories and, opening up stories. And I'm sorry, we have a little bit of a problem with the volume, so I'm just going to try to fix that. Is this better? Can you hear me better now? Thank you.
I can hear
Okay.
you.
All right. No, we had a comment on chat. Some of the audience was a little thrown by this. But I wanted to ask you, a lot of what Tara is exploring in her journey is basically this journey of coming into her own as a young woman, moving between ambiguity and desire, learning what to want. There's also a little bit of exploitation in there in different ways, trying to push at the borders of her own privilege and reach out to others, right? And what drew you to these wonderfully gray areas?
Right. I think the fact that I was a journalist, I mean, I still am, but I had, full-time journalism jobs that I have recently kind of quit, and I'm now writing fiction is quite relevant to this question, because, lately in this kind of opinion journalism that we see online, right? There's this desire to kind of quickly call this or that, have a quick opinion, then the same website or news portal will have a counter opinion in 2 hours. And of course, the kind of things that are going on in our country today, it's very important to have opinions. I'm not saying that, everybody should kind of be on this neutral platform, but do we really all need, an opinion on how good a movie Shersha is, the movie that was just out today, or whether Siddharth Malhotra looks like Vikram Batra? I don't think we are all well served by reading 20 opinions on this. So I feel that journalism kind of trains you to look at the world in a very this or that way, in a very black or white way. And for me, one of the roles of fiction was to explore the gray areas, was to explore what falls between the cracks, and also to try put in words things that you cannot in nonfiction or in journalism or in real speak. I think fiction is an area to explore the thoughts that we are all having, but are ashamed or embarrassed or afraid to discuss or to say to someone else. So for me, that ambivalence and that ambiguity was actually very important. And for me, a lot of the best fiction that I have read dwells in ambiguity. It takes readers to a certain place, but it doesn't really tell them how to think. It takes readers to that place, but then the reader is kind of free to go where they wish to. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers your question.
It does. I see that if you give up a certain kind of certainty and being sure what is right and wrong, you move into very messy territory, but very fertile territory in a lot of ways. When we spoke earlier, one of the things that you said, and you said it with great confidence and sureness, you said that you always knew you wanted to be a writer. And I had this image of you for years at various literary festivals, but also in your own writing, as somebody who grew up around books and writing and different kinds of storytelling, right? And could you talk a little bit about what it meant to you to finally start to move towards actually writing and publishing The Illuminated? It took a lot of time. You had other jobs. You had and these were not, light jobs particularly. You were an editor. That doesn't give you very much time. But how long did you take before you found out what it was that you wanted to write about? And did you know you were going to be a novelist right from the start? Was it always going to be the big, juicy book with layered characters and a lot drifting inside?
So honestly, I do have very specific answers to that question, and I do have another Roy to thank. I think I was 13 years old when I read God of Small Things, and I was a very avid reader from 10 or 9 or 10, because I had an elder brother and I was reading what he was reading. So I had read all of collected works of Anton Chekhov by the time I was 11. I'm not sure what I really understood then, but I think when you have an older sibling who you kind of worship, you read what they read. So I had read a lot, but God of Small Things was the first book by a kind of a contemporary book by an Indian novelist, by somebody who looked, like the people around me. And I think that was very encouraging. However, while my family is very artistically inclined and, has been encouraged to learn music, dance, read, write, all of that, I don't come from a family of artists. Everybody is a professional. I didn't really think I could, graduate college and tell myself, okay, I'm going to be at home for a couple of years, try to write a novel. It wasn't really an option. I had to kind of, find my own way and have a career. I wanted to rent my own place and, kind of become independent. And as we were discussing just before we got on the call, I think the commercials of fiction writing, maybe in many places, but certainly in India, are not very encouraging. So, unless you have a trust fund, you can't very well tell yourself at 21, I am a novelist. Like it's an exploration. So I'm actually quite proud of myself for kind of, building a career and doing what I needed to do to give myself the privilege and luxury to write a book. So I studied journalism. I worked with first Mint Lounge, Vogue, and then Lounge again. And I started writing the book in 2015. It was, while I was at Vogue, very demanding job, so I could only kind of write on weekends or late nights. Finally, in 2019, which was about 4 years into kind of fiddling around with the book, I realized I need to go forward. I can't just forever be telling myself I'm writing a novel when I can only see 2 chapters in 4 years. So in 2019, I actively took leave. I went to the first writing residency, and I cannot recommend enough, what a writing residency can do for a writer. It just completely cuts you off from your daily stimuli, from your routine, from your distractions, and kind of from your kind of expected comforts. And you can tell yourself that I'm here to write and I'm a writer. And I think that was very important. That was very big for me. So in that 1 month in a writing residency in Scotland, I think I wrote almost 60% of the book. And then, you know, once you see more of it happening, it kind of rolled faster from there. So it has been a close to 6-year journey. But now that I know I can finish a book, hopefully I have the confidence to, you know, move a little more streamlined now on.
But you're writing characters who come loosely from a similar background to you, but who in temperament are very, very different. And I was intrigued that both the mothers, Shashi and Tara, are both readers themselves. And something that you mentioned was that you actually spent time reading the kind of books that they did, or the kind of text that they did. So could you talk about that as well? Did you start to see the world differently through each character's eyes, each woman's eyes?
Yeah, that was such a strange idea. I think maybe it was just a way to, you know, procrastinate the actual writing, because I have two characters who are very scholarly. You know, one is a Sanskrit scholar. She's doing a PhD, so she's reading a lot. And one is somebody who has a master's degree in philosophy. And I decided that I must read what they are reading to get into their mindset. I think it was just an excuse to, you know, just spend a lot of time reading and not actually write. But for Tara, reading poetry was, I mean, I read it in translation because I'm not a Sanskrit scholar, was, you know, a wonderful experience. I feel it was, you know, I hope to always write books along the lines that I like researching what I need to research for them. So I read a lot of Bilhana and Bhatrahari, not Kalidasa as much because Tara is not a Kalidasa fan. Shashi's reading was a bit more, you know, serious because she studied Hegel in college. I found a really good resource online called Hegel by Hypertext, which kind of is a, you know, is a kind of one-stop online resource on Hegel, because I couldn't really go to libraries, say, the last, you know, 1.5 years. In a way, I feel it did help me inhabit, you know, their world, because for me, this is also a novel of ideas and theory.
Yes.
So I wanted to understand what they have studied or what they are reading, you know, and how that makes them look at their immediate world differently. So yeah, so I have a shelf in my house now as well, which is just full of books that are Shashi's books and Tara's books. Maybe I'll try to keep it that way for a while, but I wouldn't recommend this methodology. You know, it was very time consuming.
I love it though. It's very method actor, and you do change tone, you know, because you're getting into each woman's skin in such a separate way. And when you said that it's a novel of ideas, it struck me sometimes when we talk about the political novel, the way in which we use that term is to mean novels that explicitly deal with characters who are politicians or explicitly deal with the politics of the day. But right from the start, what happens in this book that I've grown to really love and think about a lot is each woman negotiates a separate space in very different ways. You know, Shashi gets married into an apparently progressive family, but as she says very early on, she felt like she'd married the entire household, not just the man. You know, and she discovers that she has to fit into this 3-story mansion in North Kolkata, right? And Tara, on the other hand, when she gets to this hostel, she's in a world that's completely unfamiliar to her. On one hand, there are women at the hostel who will challenge her sense of where she comes from and get her to think a little more deeply about the positions of privilege that she occupies. But on the other hand, at the hostel, the first time that we see this political party called the Mahalakshmi Seva Sangh is when they're doing little checks of the women's rooms. And Tara's quite startled by the fact that both they can check women's rooms at any time that they want to, and that this, you know, trampling on freedom and privacy is so casually accepted as normal. So the MMS has a role to play later in the book in a very, very sharp and very important way. But I just want to throw a couple of ideas at you and ask you to comment. Political parties, political movements, the conservative ones, do they always start off or end up by trying to control women? And how important was it for you as a writer that each character start moving towards a deeper sense of freedom? Maybe in Shashi's case, recovering a little bit of a time after all the duties and little chores that make up marriage are gone. And for Tara, in many different ways. I don't want to give away too much of the plot, but just to put this on the table.
Right. For me, Nilanjana, I think a lot of what I've observed or read in the novels that I like, and I think we know this about writing, any kind of writing, is that there has to be a change. A story is about there has to be a change in the mind of a character or in the outlook of a character from the beginning to the end. I'm sure there are other forms of, very modern or contemporary literary fiction that don't subscribe to those views, that can be all about mood and atmospherics. But for the kind of story that I like, there needed to be a change. I don't want to have a judgment on whether they became better people, whether that change is necessarily good or palliative. It can be any kind of change, but there has to be a change. But I also then realized that, when you're writing a novel, you're setting up a world, and that world doesn't necessarily end when the reader reaches the last page. So for me, Tara and Shashi are on a journey of change, and the journey is also not linear. It's up and down because there's a lunar symbology in the book. So, it's waxing and waning. So, they're going maybe one step ahead, two steps behind, three steps ahead through the book. And where they come to in the end is of the book of Illuminated is again not necessarily for me the end of their story. And I think where the reader thinks their story ends is that's up to the reader, and that's up to the reader's kind of morality or worldview or thinking. So all I could do was put them in motion, put them and throw things their way that kind of accelerates that motion or slows down the motion. But there was an intention for them to at least, shake up the status quo and see things around them and get moving. And hopefully when we get moving, we get to a, place that's better for us than we are now.
Yes, I see that. I just wanted to share a little bit about the book cover with the audience, particularly people who haven't seen it. This is one of the most beautiful and intelligent and striking book covers I've seen. You have the moons in different stages, and it kind of mirrors the journey of the women, moving to times of eclipse, times of fullness. And here is the cover itself with the full moon on it. I thought that was just beautiful design. I wanted to draw you into a question about the relationship between Tara and one of the most important characters in the novel, the Sanskrit professor Amitabh Dhar. But one of our audience members has asked it even better. This is from Atreyi Roy Chaudhary, and he says, "Dear Anindita, congratulations on your first novel. Could you kindly elaborate on Tara's relationship with the older man in the novel? How does this relationship impact her journey as a woman, as well as could you discuss the challenges faced by her? Thank you." And I thought that was such a beautiful question because there's a lot to do with power out there. I mean, there are obvious, because this is happening in a time of Me Too, we are very aware of power differentials, but there's a lot more to it, and he's put it beautifully.
Right. So, Atreyi and to others listening, again, I feel that it's not up to me to actually explain their relationship or say whether it's right or wrong. I really think that's up to the reader. I think you have the information and it's up to the reader. And I also think that perhaps readers in different points of their life, in different life stages, life phases might have a different take on it. I think again, I don't want to give away too much, but Tara is confused because she looks at the world as black or white. So she's a young woman, and I think we see that urge to be very very opinionated in a lot of, our 20-something friends and colleagues. So she can't comprehend that somebody she loves can also have a darker side to them. For her, it either has to be this or that. But I think it's a conversation with her mother that kind of makes her see that, both things could be true. And I think this idea of both things can be true was a kind of moral base for me while writing this book, because I think we're moving in a world where, you can end a friendship of 20 years because you don't agree on a certain aspect of veganism, or you can, split up from, I don't know, somebody you care a lot about because you disagree on one aspect or one thing. So it's not about not caring, but I think it's about seeing that sometimes it's possible for two truths or more than one truth to coexist. And each of us have to find our own illumination. I guess that was the kind of, the significance of the title. We have to find our own illumination within these many truths. So I think I would be giving away too much or speaking out of turn if I speak more about their relationship, because I really think that's up to the reader to figure.
You've also answered Mudit Jain's question. He'd asked, why is the book called The Illuminated? And you just answered that, but just to get back to it, did it take you a while to come up with the title?
Yes, so, I was with this idea of the lunar scheme was there with me for a while. The chapter titles are moon phases. The names of the female characters are all different names for the moon. The male characters are named of the sun. So I think there was this sense of women as revolving around the sun and asking, why should our lives revolve around the sun? Are there different sources of light? Can the moon have its own light? So for a long time, actually, my title was something else. It had moons in it. And my editor, Udayan Mitra at HarperCollins, I think we brainstormed a bit. And he felt that that could be limiting, that could ward off a certain kind of reader. And I was very tied to the name. But, in the end, you want to do what's best for the book. And I also began to think that maybe there's more than just lunar symbology in the book. The metaphor of light is a very powerful one. From the Upanishads to Audre Lorde, who is quoted in the book, to Rumi, they've all used this sense of light as knowledge. So I thought The Illuminated was a broader title rather than just something with moons in it, which I also thought would ward off male readers. And that's something I was very keen on. Most journalism, most books journalism in India is women. Most readers seem to be women. So a lot of people, a lot of readers who are writing to me are, women in their mid-20s. They're writing to me saying, Pia Tara, I feel like Tara, or my mother is Shashi. And it's really lovely to see all of that. But for me, the real success of the book would be if there are men in their 50s and 60s who read the book, because I think a lot of the messaging in the book is also meant for them. So I wanted it to, not be confined to this kind of gendered reading. There are lots of actual stats. I think The Guardian did a piece recently about how women read books by both men and women, but men predominantly read books only by men. And I don't think that's fair. I think that should change. So I would like men to read the book. And I think that might explain not just the name of the novel, but also the cover. A lot of books by women tend to have these kind of shades of pink, purple. There's flowers, graphics,
You absolutely didn't want that.
Warm and accessible. And I thought, why should my book cover not look like a Jonathan Franzen cover or a Philip Roth cover? Why should my book cover say, hey, this is a book by a woman? So I'm really happy that the cover, despite how beautiful and aesthetic it is not, screaming, book by a female author. So, yeah.
In that sense, I'm glad that we have two men in the chat asking questions, one of whom has clearly read your book. And Mudit had a follow-up. He said, I get it about the title, that it seems self-enlightenment at the end of it. There's one more question by an anonymous attendee who says, how much do you draw from your own life when you craft fictional characters? And I had a caveat to that, which was to say, I thought that maybe one of the great pleasures of this book for you as a journalist who spends so much time dealing with facts and dealing with reality was maybe also stepping into the freedom of the imagination. So,
but there's Nilanjana, someone that I've been reading a lot of lately is Clarice Lispector, the Brazilian writer. And in her last and final novel, The Hour of the Star, she puts it really beautifully. I actually wrote it down because that's how certain I was of someone asking this question, because women especially get asked much more if the book is biographical, and I'm not irritated by it. I've just, because I've done the same as a journalist, I've realized, so I love this quote from the book, but she says, truth is always an interior and inexplicable contact. So I guess what I want to say is that it's all true and it's all false. It's very hard to draw a line as a novelist. You end up drawing even details and facts from things around you. It might anger people, but it's never done out of malice. It's just that that's what's in your toolkit. And when you're building a character, you sometimes just draw characteristics and observations, but it never means that, that character is that person. And I think it's very hard usually to draw these kind of biographical lines, but I think the lines are always pretty blurry.
It is a challenging one, because what you're doing actually with this kind of book, and this is why I think the question of whether it's autobiographical at some level doesn't really matter. You end up if you're spending 6 years with this world of characters all interlinked and all of them with very complicated relationships. The mother and the daughter are fond of each other, but they have their own areas of prickliness and own areas of disagreement. And if you're spending that kind of time with them with such intimacy, I sometimes I understand where it comes from again, the impulse to ask a novelist like you, how much does it draw from your own life? But I think, what maybe is a more interesting question is you're forced into a very close and intimate relationship with your fictional characters. And did you change in the writing of this book?
Yes, that's a lovely question, Nilanjan. I also think that 5 years is a long time. You change as a person. I'm also very conscious of the fact that the start of the book and the end of the book are very different. They are in different registers, and but I've embraced that. I've realized that's also the journey of the characters. Maybe the characters perhaps started off with a more mannered and privileged and ordered worldview, and the world they are living in towards the end is not ordered. So it's okay for also the book to change its vocabulary to reflect that. But yes, 5 years is such a long time that as your characters change, because at some point, as somebody who's now working on her third and fourth book simultaneously, that at some point you're not actively making decisions for your characters. I know it sounds completely woo-woo, and I've probably laughed at writers saying this in the past, but it's true. At some point, you are not actively making decisions. Your characters know what they're doing. You cannot force them to do certain things. They are whole, real human beings in your life. So you can't make them wear something or eat something or read something that they don't want to. So maybe they are an extension of your subconscious in some way, but they have free will. So as they change, I think they change you, and it's kind of a vicious cycle, because then you're changing. You've had different experiences in these 5 years, and then you want to change something or add something in your characters, emotional kind of landscape. So it's quite a curious experience, but I definitely think the one thing that I learned from my characters, or I thought that I have to tell myself, because so much of the book was about telling my characters to expand their worldview and to rid themselves of judgment, that I think the one big takeaway of me writing the book is that I have learned to inhabit spaces with less judgment. because I felt that judgment was harming my characters so much. They were living in a world where they were judged for who they are friends with, or what they eat, or what they study. They're judged for everything as women in this world of the illuminated. So I think I kind of have learned to inhabit spaces without judgment. So that's one big takeaway from me after the book. And I'm very protective of my characters, but after living with them for 6 years, I kind of had to nudge and send them out into the world. So I hope they are understood. Yeah, they're not mine
That's
anymore.
such a beautiful.
What I'm saying.
I know that's a poignant moment, when you say that you can't protect them, but they need to be out there as well. And the book's just about 296 pages, and it reads so smoothly, and it takes a second reading for you to go back and see all the layers. I got the sense that you worked very hard on structure, but not in a flat way. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about the process of writing the book as a first-time writer. Oh, one sec. There's a question from Sana Goel, which is very similar. Can you talk about craft, technique, and process? Coming to the page day after day, the construction of sentences or scenes. What was the experience of the writing itself as a first-time writer?
Right. So, Nilanjana, we had spoken about it briefly before, but now since most people with, first books out have studied writing, now it's gone from not just having an MFA in creative writing, but there's a PhD in creative writing that's pretty popular in the UK now. I haven't studied writing. Everything that I have learned about writing is from reading and from listening to other writers, whether it's at festivals like Jaipur Lit Fest or reading interviews in the Paris Review or the New Yorker. And I think that's been invaluable. So it's been kind of, snatches of advice also from writer friends or from people or from interviews here and there. So, since this was my first book, I don't know if I have a process. Maybe it'll change in my third or fourth book. I just know for this book, it was really just about swimming with, and trying to keep your head above water every day. But I also think that that I'm never going to tell somebody what my next novel or the novel after that is about, because I've realized that you only really know what it is, the book. You only really know what your book is once you've finished writing the first draft. And the first draft writing is such a kind of, it's about energy, and it's almost happening at a kind of someone else is writing it through you. I don't know. It's kind of, I wouldn't say it's auto writing, but it's a lot about showing up every day and just putting out what you can. But the actual writing, the crafting, what you edit, the chapters that you move around, all of that happens, at least happened for me, might not be true for others, after you've finished your first draft. So I feel that's when the writing actually happens, the patterns fall into place, you give your characters added layers or ticks. So honestly, for me, this was really just about keeping my head above water and just writing. But a lot happened in the editing. In kind of the last year of the book is when I feel it became the book that it is now. Up until then, it was just a collection of notes about what I thought the book should be like. It's more about like writing a book about the book.
Yes, that is a very, very interesting way to put it. It seems to, it almost rewards the kind of time that you put into it. And as hard as it is to make a career as a writer, I was struck in a previous conversation by your absolute commitment to going ahead from the Illuminated to other projects. And you worked on a screenplay. You're also going to be soon, or you are already immersed in your next novel. And I just want to read out a comment by, again, the anonymous attendee. This is a comment, not a question. But what I liked was the fact that nothing in this book is black and white. All the relationships are complicated, messy, and that's okay, especially at a time when there's a tendency to vilify everyone. Is it disorienting being a writer in this very Twitter, Instagram, Facebook age? You spoke earlier about instant judgment, but the public self of being a writer and the private self, going ahead, how are you going to be comfortable with that? those two very
Um,
different worlds?
and Nilanjana, I feel it's too soon. Like so far, I
Mm-hmm.
needed to be on social media. I needed to be on Twitter for my job. I mean, honestly, it's if you're an editor in India today, you have to be on Twitter to figure what's going on. But as a writer, perhaps it's not the best place to be because um, seeing that kind of anger and again quick opinions and there's some new thing every day, right? There's a new issue every
Mm-hmm.
day. I think, and all of that is important. I'm not saying that no one should engage in those discourses, but I think different people have different roles in society. So as a novelist, if you engage in a kind of daily discourse of, that level of daily discourse, I don't think you can work on something. I wouldn't say bigger, that sounds condescending, but I don't think you can work on something that's a little step back or larger than that, because then you'll always be stuck in that daily discourse. So I think there's a role for writers who are writing opinion columns. There is a role for that, and they need to be part of this daily discourse. But when you're writing books, and I'm not against, as Franzen said, I don't believe that anyone with an internet connection cannot be a writer today. He was famously trolled for that statement. So I don't think that's true. I think, there are different parts of yourself. You're still a human who, might want to wish their friends on their birthday and share pictures. You're still all of that. You don't let go of all your other identities because you're a novelist. But I think there is a space that you have to carve for yourself that is a bit private and away from that. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that there are phases when you can do that. Like I feel even in novel writing at the drafting stage, when you're ideating or you're just writing, that's when you need that peace and quiet. But when you're at an editing stage or when you're at a research stage, I think it's perfectly fine to be, as you are at ease, go along your routine. So yeah, if your question was what kind of writer do I want to be? I mean, I don't know yet. It's too early. I'm still Anindita Ghose, who was a journalist up to, just a few months ago, and now this book is out. So I think I will answer your question. When you're talking about your sixth book, Nilanjana, I'm talking about my third. We will have
No,
this
no.
discussion.
I'm still learning how to be a writer. But there is a question from Nilanjana Bhaduri who says, congratulations on your book. Out of curiosity, would you continue to explore the intricacies of Shashi and Tara in your future work? And I think I know the answer to that, but go for it.
Would I? So there was a review recently, I think in The Wire by Uttaran Das
Mm-hmm.
Gupta, where he said that the ending is a series of beginnings. And I thought he put it really well. And for me, I do think that the novel shows various extremes, and the synthesis of what happens in their world is outside the novel. But again, I feel I've left that for the reader to do. So the reader writes that part. As of now, I'm quite happy to move on to other worlds and other ideas. But I would never say never. Who knows? Maybe after 10 years I'd want to revisit. But it's not something that I'm actively thinking of right now. Right now, I'm really just happy to have them out there and work on something else. But yeah.
Well, a question on behalf of some of your viewers and readers who might, be wanting to step into the world of fiction themselves. Uh, did it help you coming from a profession like journalism where you have a little bit of familiarity with the discipline of writing, to a deadline or to a word count or whatever? And the second thing is just advice. You have an agent, and I presume that you worked with editors very closely. So what kind of advice would you give people about that side of the craft?
Whether journalism helps in fiction writing?
That's one.
Yes.
And the second part of it is, as a professional writer, how best should you approach the whole question of working with an agent or an editor? I know a lot
Right.
of young writers who are so happy about what they've written that it's hard for them to accept being edited. But did you find it a useful process?
Well, I found, the editing process was so beneficial and so useful. And it was very hard for me to adjust to it because, being an editor in journalism, we give very micro edits. So, there are line edits or it's very specific, add a comment. And I've been used to doing that day in and day out. I realized with fiction, the edits were more suggestions. And perhaps not all editors are like that, but I'm certain that the good ones are. And Udayan Mitra, my editor, all of his edits were questions, apart from certain things that he was very keen on. So it's just to get you to rethink something, or would you consider doing this? And I think when you know that, it's writing is so much about ego. We can't tell ourselves that it's not, or you need some amount of confidence to think that something that you're writing is of interest to people. So I think it can be incredibly hard taking edits from somebody that you don't wholly trust or respect, because it's very easy, like you said, you're close to what you've written. So it's very easy to think that you're not getting it, or, you're too old fashioned. It's very easy to dismiss edits like that. But I think editing is a very, very valuable process. I also know now there's a kind of trend of people getting external editors even before they pitch a manuscript to an agent, or at the agent level, they work with an editor before it's pitched to publishing houses. So I think you would be doing yourself and your manuscript a great disservice if you just kind of shoot off something the day after you finish writing it. I think you yourself gain so much perspective, just rereading your own work. Sorry, I think that was the second part of your question, Nilanjana.
That's fine. That covers most of it. And I agree with you on this. I think you work with an editor out of respect for the work itself, more than even the market or more than even wanting it to last. I think a lot of it is in service of the story. There's one last question I think I want to take from the audience from Sampurna Chaudhary, who says, is there any specific reason why you chose Sanskrit learning as a part of your book?
Right.
I think
this part of it, I think selfishly, like I said, I was, I obviously wanted my characters to be interested in things that I would be interested in reading about, because there was a lot of reading involved. So, why would I want Tara to be studying some kind of organic chemistry that I would have to then research, So I was interested, but I think partly also because I was interested in, like I mentioned earlier, this idea of what's on the other side of this story. And with Sanskrit in recent times, if you tell anybody, ask if somebody tells you they're studying Sanskrit, or when you think of Sanskrit, you think of Sanskrit shlokas, or you think of liturgical texts. And there is a wealth of, poetical literature in Sanskrit. There's a lot of aesthetic writing in Sanskrit. And we don't now think of that. It's not the first thing that comes to us. So I think part of it was that I wanted to explore this other side of Sanskrit. And I also wanted to give Tara something hard, like I wanted to have her study something that would demonstrate that
scholar, she wants to work hard, and I don't think it's very easy to do a PhD in Sanskrit if you're, just kind of doing it for show or doing it to be cool. You can't. So I think, multiple reasons.
Okay. That answers the question. And I was just wondering, there are so many layers to the Illuminated. We've talked a lot about the women, the relationships in the book, their growth, hinted at a relationship that is actually particularly difficult and complicated, And I just wanted to talk about one more layer, which was the evocation of grief, which I thought was beautifully done.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry.
For some reason, I don't know if it's just.
Can you hear me? Your voice.
I just lost your.
All right. Hi. Just checking with the audience.
Yes, I can hear you.
All right. Fine. So just to get back to this, I was saying that the Illuminated had many emotional layers to it. And one of the things that touched and almost broke my heart was your evocation of what happens in the aftermath of grief. And I was wondering whether I could ask you to just share a short reading, perhaps with all of our lovely audience today.
Sure.
If you'd just like to read a little section from the book.
Sure. So, since you're speaking about grief, I mean, I'd marked a couple of sections, but there's this one that was also part of this was excerpted in Scroll. This is when, it's not a spoiler because we already know that Robi Malik dies, but this is when Tara hears about the news of her father's death. So, should I read? Nilanjana, you can tell me when to stop. That was how Tara received the news. On a slip of paper in a spidery scrawl. Father died. Call Shojo. The message reached her in this manner because she had not responded to the many messages left at the language center the day before. The woman remained silent and gave her 2 other slips of paper. They were as redundant as romance novels were these days. Urgent from New Jersey, call. We are trying to reach you, Baba no more. She handed her the notes with the same equanimity with which she conveyed messages when Tara missed her mother's calls. Tara was never particular about calling back. When she did, her mother had the same questions about money, sweaters, covering her ears while running, eating enough rice. She rarely made any calls to her family from Dharamshala, unless it was to tell them to transfer money or courier her books. The woman held Tara's hands, closed her eyes, and said a long prayer. Before Tara could say anything, she had turned around and left. Tara's first instinct was to look out from her balcony. There was the sky, the pagodas of the Dalai Lama temple rising in the distance, the big deodar spreading its limbs like men on public buses, the tea stall opposite the road, and even the Pahari cow with colorful beads around her neck who parked herself there daily. The cycles chained in a row to a metal railing were not there. It was past 9 now, and they had made their way into other streets and lanes, their destiny yoked to their owners. The world, with its order and rhythm, was in order. Only her father, older than her world, was gone. As children, Tara and Shojo would laugh when they heard servants use the word expire for deceased relatives. Medicines and packaged foods expire. Can a human being finish his purpose? Literally cease to be useful? As a child, she had found the misplaced usage funny. It seemed cruel now. But the democracy of death in the English language seemed unfair. A terrorist could be dead in an encounter, a rogue elephant could be shot dead, and now her father too was just dead. In Indian tongues, a common criminal and her father would sway the verbs differently to conjugate.
Thank you so much for that. That was just beautiful. And I just have, and that was a beautiful reading as well, and it was just so gently but so savagely done. You know, this the unfairness of it all when you lose somebody you love so dearly. And this was one of many moments in the book that not just moved me, but moved me and at the same time made me think a little bit, made me step back and re-examine something I thought I knew. And that is one of the gifts that the great novelists have. And so I think we are moving through the end of the session, but I just had a couple of questions. Fiction, what has it meant to you over the years? First as a reader and also as somebody who's interviewed a lot of writers. And now here you are, you're a writer yourself. It's obvious to me that you have a lot of work ahead of you. You're going to be writing more and more in the way of whatever it is, whether it's novels or short stories. What does fiction mean to you? What role does it play in your life? How do you cherish it? How will you change that?
So I think at different points of our lives, we read books for different reasons, but primarily for me, fiction is a way, a good novel is a way to transport me, either geographically, but definitely psychologically. I mean, it's a way for, to enable you to inhabit another space. And I think the best novels, allow you to do that, whether it's 18th century Russia, or whether, it's the mind of a kind of a pedophile. I think both are equally important. It allows you to travel primarily.
Yes, it really is that. There is one last question, I think, from Himanshu Bhagat, who's saying, what do you enjoy more, being a journalist or being a novelist?
Right. So Himanshu Bhagat is actually a former colleague from Mint, from 10 years ago. So I think it's a slightly naughty question, but they're very different. I really enjoyed my jobs, as a journalist and editor. I was very proud to have, Priya Ramani was one of my first editors. She was a terrific person to work with, and Priya Khanna at Vogue, and Sukumar, who's now with HD. So I had really good editors that I worked with. I really enjoyed my job, but I feel this is entirely a different skill set. This is entirely a different space. I think writing books makes me happier, maybe also because you're able to control more of it and it's yours. In journalism today, the impulses of journalism today, the deliverables of journalism today, they might not necessarily be everything that you are ready to give or do. So I definitely enjoyed drafting a novel over checking Chartbeat for, which column did well that day. It's not fun after a point. This is definitely more enjoyable, but it also makes you far more vulnerable. I feel a little different, a shift in personality. As a journalist, you're okay being more critical, you're okay engaging in certain discussions. But as a novelist, I feel I don't want to go into certain spaces, or I don't want to, jump on a bandwagon criticizing a movie which half the people haven't even seen, but they want to trash. Like, I feel the impulses are different. I feel more generous as a novelist, or maybe I just feel that now, but I'm definitely happier being a novelist.
Thank you so much. That's such a beautiful way to put it. And I think my only regret is that because you're still writing those books, I don't have the Anindita Ghose bookshelf. And I'm pretty sure that someday that is going to happen. There is going to be a shelf of books with your name on it, a combination of novels, perhaps short stories. I'm not sure which direction we're going to go in next. I see you also as being very much part of a community of writers, many of them women, from the past and the present. And just to wrap up, which writers would you recommend that people should read aside from you at this point? Are there writers who are very dear to you? Are there writers whose books you would want to share with this audience?
Right. So I don't want to name the obvious writers that I feel, this audience is already reading some of them, but I'm reading Clarice Lispector now, and it's just, I find her fascinating. Another person that I was actually introduced to by a colleague is a feminist science fiction writer called, actually she writes more than science fiction, it's horror science fiction, Carmen Maria Machado. And I've never read anything like that before. And that's just, she's just somebody I've been reading for the last 2 years. And I find it fascinating. So, because I know this group is already reading Jhumpa Lahiri and Elena Ferrante and, all of those names. I think these are 2 wild cards that I hope to have, drawn you towards. So yeah, Clarice Lispector and Carmen Maria Machado. Really fascinating women that I've been enjoying recently.
Great picks, particularly Carmen Machado. Her Body and Other Stories was one of the most chilling and a satisfying collection of short stories I've come across. There's a message from David Abraham who wants to say congratulations.
Okay.
And a message from Shabnam who says, thank you so much, Anindita, for this lovely conversation. And Anindita, I'm so thrilled that I had a chance to talk to you. And I learned a lot from hearing you talk about writing. I'm going to think for a while about what you said about both writing and reading being a space where you can practice a kind of immersion, a kind of quietness, a kind of reflectiveness, instead of going for the instant opinion. And I'm definitely going to spend a lot less time on Twitter thanks to you. And thank you for this beautiful, beautiful book. And I wish you a long career of being a writer and coming out with many more. And I just want to say thank you to the audience, to all of you out here, those of you who came out with your rather wonderful comments and questions, and those of you who were here to listen. It is just wonderful to be in your company, even if we can't see each other across stage the way we normally would. And a big thank you to the Asia Society, to Inakshi, to Tarini, and Ketaki for organizing all of this. What a wonderful way to spend an evening, Anindita. Thank you.
Thank you, Nilanjana. Thanks, everyone.